Hello, everyone. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today, and I'm excited to have a great discussion really about some of the biggest challenges in healthcare. They were challenges before COVID-19, and I think even now they're even more exacerbated. And then we're also going to talk about cool technology, which as a tech guy myself, I mean, literally at Tech Guy on Twitter, I can't wait to hear about this new technology. I'd say newer, it's been evolving for decades, really, to get there. But anyways, we'll dive into our topic today, which is AI assistance in healthcare. And I have a great panel here, and so we'll let each of them introduce themselves. We'll start first. Graham, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Nice to catch up with everybody, and thanks for having us on, John. I'm Dr. Graham Hughes. I'm the President, Chief Operating Officer at Saykara. I've spent about 30 years in health information technology, often building the electronic records that have caused so much of a problem. So I joined Saykara about 7 months ago, and it's kind of fun because I can now fix all of the errors of the past by trying to make things easier for docs.
Well, that's the goal, and that's why I think this technology is so exciting. Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Great to be here and participate today on this important subject matter. Ryan Plash. I'm our Vice President of Business Development and Strategy, and based out of Seattle, and have been in the healthcare IT space for at least a couple decades. And it's really great to see this use of technology transforming the work life for physicians, and that part is just really gratifying.
Awesome. Glad to have you here, Ryan. And last but not least, Gabe, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, no, thanks, John. So yeah, I'm Gabe Charbonneau. I'm a family practice doctor in rural Montana, and actually been friends with John for a while, and totally happy to be part of this conversation. And I've been piloting Saykara since November, and probably for about the last 8 or 9 years championing how can we use technology to help clinical people more rather than to create the cumbersome challenges that it often likes to do. So yeah, I'm excited to be here for that. I have a passion project called Fight Burnout, which is sort of my attempt to start a movement of saying like, hey, we've got to change this status quo of burnout causing all kinds of problems for doctors and patients alike. And recently gotten into the wild west of organizing doctors for trying to figure out how we can make a difference. So I guess I'm good at getting myself into things, but it all comes from really wanting something better and realizing that this is a time when we have a chance to make a difference. So excited to be here.
Great to have you here, Gabe. And I actually meant to wear your shirt today. He has this amazing Fight Burnout shirt. Check out the hashtag Fight Burnout on Twitter. Amazing effort that you're working on there. And so let's just dive into that. I mean, I think burnout is one element of it, but to me, one of the biggest influencers of burnout by doctors is that physician documentation burden, which many say is the EHR, which I think, we could discuss that maybe through this chat, but tell us about what is the physician documentation burden from you? I mean, you're literally living this as a doctor.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I want to share. My personal experience I'll share, but also just some statistics that I think are fairly well known but still interesting. So there was an article that came out in Annals of Internal Medicine recently. It was like 150,000 doctors surveyed, and the average amount of time spent in the EHR per patient encounter is like 16 minutes now. Which, when you start to add up the math and think about, well, how long was my last doctor's appointment? A huge amount of time is being dedicated to things that are not patient care. So I mean, I think there's more and more evidence that that's really problematic. And so on a personal note, I graduated from residency in 2007, and about the time we were transitioning to electronic charts. And when I began, I mean, medicine's always been sort of this intense field, but it was like on came this job on top of your job. And in the beginning, it was little bits. So it was starting out by doing notes and reviewing labs in the chart. But over time, there's become more and more sort of digital tasks that end up on the plate of the physician. And so I've been using this analogy probably too much, but I feel like it's like the frog that's boiled to death in water slowly, that when you're first in there, it's like, oh, this is kind of nice and warm, and then like over time, it's like one little thing and another little thing and another little thing until finally the frog is dead. And didn't really feel it happening. And that's kind of what I think my experience has been with the EHR, is that along the way, there are times when it's more stressful than others, but there's been this sort of ongoing march towards getting more difficult, being more workload, less time with patients, less connection with people. And that's what I think the real problem is that we're up against.
That's a great description. It's death by 1,000 cuts of documentation, as opposed to, yeah, if they would have said it all at once, doctors would have revolted. But little by little, hey, here, we need this for reimbursement, we need this for meaningful use, we need this for MIPS, and now you're just overwhelmed. So, you know, Graham, how about you? You know, let's talk about your AI assistant at Saykara. You guys have developed this AI assistant to really help with this challenge. So, you know, can you describe how it works, and, you know, and what is it really able to do for doctors?
Yeah, sure. And it's funny because, well, you know, Gabe nailed it. We started out because, you know, we saw this big problem where people were, you know, physicians were spending hours at night, hours at weekend, and just, you know, personally and professionally getting frustrated. So, yeah, we had looked at ways of doing this in the past. So if you think about the previous days of dictation and transcription, our founder, Harjinder Sandhu, was the CTO of a company that had focused on this technology. In fact, that company was acquired by Nuance. He ended up becoming the CTO at Nuance, and you know, which is again famous for you know, voice recognition primarily. And so what he had done is he'd sort of de-skilled the transcriptionist, and the question was, well, hey, could we de-skill the scribe? So where docs were starting to say, look, in the end, I need to get a human scribe in the room. What could we do if we could turn that human scribe, digitize the, you know, the brain power and the thinking that a human scribe has? Oftentimes they're kind of pre-med students, you know, and you could do that so it's reliable, it's there 24/7, there's no turnover. You know, can you make it intelligent enough to kind of understand what's going on? And, you know, if you could do that, then obviously the goal from day one was, can we flip the paradigm around? So instead of the way that Gabe was describing, you know, doctors having to adapt to the computer, you know, our sort of day number one was, well, look, what can we do to make the technology adapt to the physician, not the other way around? And so instead of having that technology get in the way of the physician-patient interaction, what if it could augment that, and the device was sort of just transparently there, and you talk to the patient just as you naturally would have done. And the idea is that with something as ubiquitous as a phone, so, you know, you just have that sitting there, and the idea is, could we use some technology like that as the tech in this has become increasingly powerful, and could it just ambiently listen, you know, just be the fly on the wall and interpret the essence of what was going on in the conversation. So that's what we did, and I think that many organizations, you know, a lot of people, if you talk about an AI assistant, they think of Siri, or they think of Alexa or Google Home. You know, they're kind of these home personal assistants, but it's a very different breed of animal, because those types of assistants are really kind of command driven. You can say up to about 6 or 7 words to them, and try it, you know, then they get confused. If we had a conversation and we were doing this, Siri would be baffled, you know, so would Alexa, right? All of these things. So you can say up to about seven seconds, and then it's really going to get confused. We took it the other end, which is, how do you deal with conversations that are long form, that are nuanced, that are kind of complex? And so the bottom line, we just wanted to build technology that had zero extra effort on behalf of the doctor, and that's still our goal, which is, can you just let docs get back to doing what they do best, interacting with patients, thinking about what needs to get done, 100% focus on the patient. So that's really what our AI does. It's a mobile assistant. It sits there, listens ambiently to what you're saying. It can take commands as well. So you might say, hey, I'd like you to use my template for a, you know, chest exam, you know, use my normals apart from the following. You could use it to say, hey, please pull forwards a prior note, or let's, you know, place an order for A, B, C, or D, you know, let's get an order for Plavix in there. But in the end, the idea is that you can instruct it if it makes sense and it's easier, just like you would do for a human scribe. But oftentimes you don't want to keep giving instructions. You just want the human scribe to listen, and just like that, that's what we tried to do with the AI scribe. So, basically, what can an AI scribe do? It could probably pretty much do anything that a human scribe could do, except for maybe ordering pizza for the lunch meetings. But then again, maybe that's something that it could do too.
It could do that.
Right?
But anyone would ask of as the AI gets better and better and better, you could make it do pretty much anything. So the great thing about these AI assistants, and we've been around now for about 5 years, so we're one of the first in this space, is like any AI, it gets better with data. And so the more data you throw at it, the better it gets, the more it starts to understand. And Gabe's been great with us, working on, helping us to train and educate the system over time. And, we've got hundreds of users now who are sending in, thousands and thousands of notes. So Kara gets smarter every day, which is, that's the exciting thing for me.
And how does this, I mean, we hear a lot of these terms. We hear AI scribes, we hear digital assistants, we hear ambient clinical voice, or, clinical voice assistants, or digital assistant. There's all these terminology. Is there a difference, or how do you kind of see the marketplace? I mean, obviously we know scribes and we know AI empowered scribes. I think that's pretty clear. But, when you get up to the digital assistant and the ambient clinical voice, do you see a differentiation happening there?
Yeah, it's really confusing. You remember the days when everyone at HIMSS was claiming that they had, we're a population health company, or we do advanced analytics, or we do patient engagement, or
everyone's now a telehealth company. If you talk to a patient at all, you are a telehealth company now, even if it's a text message.
It's like, what does that even mean? It's like you're a digital health organization. It means you use technology, So yeah, telemedicine, it's like that's just medicine using digital technology. So it should work. But these are all vague terms, and that's the thing with this whole space around scribing, virtual scribing, AI scribes, AI assistants, human assist, personal assistants, chatbots. It's been tough to kind of lift the fog. There's a fog around this at the moment, just like there was a fog around telemedicine and so forth. So they're vague terms, and it's tough to kind of make the contours of the landscape, during that fog.
How do you differentiate them? How do you kind of look at the different?
Yeah. So what we do is we think it's less about the name that you give it, and it's more about the experience that the physician or the user has. So, regardless of what you call it, and rather than segmenting things into kind of dumb assistants, you got like the sort of the series. They're not really dumb, but they're very limited. So there's that sort of command driven, hey do this, hey do that, hey do the other, and I have to do these short phrases. And there are others that are much more just like voice recognition on steroids, but they're not really doing anything significant with the conversation. So we're actually about to release a white paper on kind of how do you look at this landscape? Because there's a lot of people ask us, are you the same as A or B or C? And we're typically not. So as I say, it's less about the name, it's more about the experience. We care about the ability for the physician to talk naturally to the patient, without having to use any of these unnatural commands. So it's like the AI understands what we're saying. It would be like us getting meeting notes out of what we were talking about here, or sort of a digest. So we want that to happen. And it's the level to which the AI can understand and translate that into something meaningful. So that's kind of the one thing. Can it listen ambiently, and can it, can it interpret it in a meaningful way? Second is it with you wherever you go? So whenever you want to move, is it mobile? Is it there with you? There's no point in having a fixed device. And because then what happens when you leave the room? Then you're going to have to transition to another device. So the device has, technology should follow you rather than you trying to figure out where the technology is. And then how deeply is it integrated into the systems that you care about? So there's a lot of information stored in the EHR. There's a lot of information stored in other records. To what extent can you pull data? Can the system interact with that seamlessly? So the that your schedule for the day is pulled up. I can ask to pull forwards prior notes. I can ask to get lab results and so forth. There's the level of integration that you have, and of course the EHR systems don't make it easy. So trying to get discrete data pushed back into those is always a little bit of a challenge. Some companies getting better at that. Cures Act will help us, and some of the interoperability rules there. But that's the seamless integration. And then the other is, to what extent is granular data, codified data, useful, meaningful data available, so that you can actually start to analyze, what's really going on in those encounters, and then, you can use it for other purposes, which it could help you with coding, or it could help you with other things. And then the fourth is, how many care settings can you support? So does it just work in one care setting? Does it only work for one user? So we're just looking at a kind of a spectrum across that, and rather than just purely trying to categorize the market, it's more about how do you categorize the experience. And so I guess that's what we say, is we're focused on all of those different levels, and we're eager to support the right experience at the right time with the right level of integration in the right setting of care. So, and we get guided every day by our physicians and the users. So we kind of we're learning as we go with them as well.
Yep. No, I like that. That's some differentiating features that are pretty interesting. The integration being one of the most challenging because of the EHR vendors, and yet every doctor requires it, because last I checked, Gabe wants to get paid for the visits he does. So, which for good or bad, the EHR vendor connected to the PM system or whatever it might be is how you get paid. So, yeah, that makes sense. Ryan, let's come to you, and let's talk about, you obviously have been kind of at the front lines of this. I've talked to you for a number of years through this evolution of the product and improvement. What's been the reaction of doctors? Because it almost feels mystical, right, to say that an AI assistant can do this to me. Do doctors believe that it can really help them and that this can be done effectively?
I think there's a high degree of skepticism up front, and there's been some disappointment in the realm of artificial intelligence and a lot of the hype. And in healthcare, it's conservative, and so physicians are they're a little skeptical and kind of wait and see, but they're optimistic that there can be a solution to the cognitive burden and all the clerical data entry that is kind of they're saddled with throughout the day. But it doesn't take long to make believers out of them, as a matter of fact. And there's not this delayed gratification like you see in a lot of digital health platforms, where you need to wait 3, 6, 9 months before you see some improvements in efficiency and quality and such. And so in the first week, in fact, in bringing on the platform, the magical moment is that if you heard the stats and have seen some of the data has come out, that the average physician is spending 2 to 3 hours a night doing charting late into the evenings, and that they spend, there's a 2-to-1 ratio of time spent between the patient and into the EHR. Well, that after hours charting goes away the very first day. There's not much delay in that case. First time they bring on a full day's work of patients. And so if that's a pain point for them, there's immediate gratification. And so that's kind of a magic moment for them, that they're going home on time. This concept of home for dinner is a big one. And we know that many physicians are very efficient, but they pay a high cost for that, right? They're doing a lot of clerical busy work between encounters, during lunch, in the room, sometimes even compromising the bedside manner. That's so important, and one of the reasons why patients feel disconnected to some degree in some physician groups. But that changes dramatically right away. And so, I get a lot of reluctance up front, but we make believers out of them very quickly. And some of the biggest, I'd say, naysayers, I even get furrowed brow and looks that says, "Come on," and so it's that part's important. And in many scenarios, some physicians feel that, look, I've just offloaded so much of the distractive, busy work that, not only can I spend more time with the patient, I might even be able to fit in an extra patient or two per day without experiencing that heavy cognitive load that you do with all the keyboard and clicking. And to Graham's point, what we're really trying to achieve and what we want to do is free the physician in mid-level away from the keyboard and mouse and just 100% focus on patient. So yeah, it's been dramatic, and we have one example that comes to mind is a nurse practitioner that was working up until 10 p.m. Every night, has a family, and really almost was in tears as we kind of engaged, and she was highly skeptical that anything was going to change, but she was willing to do so because she was considering, really quitting and or career change, because really she didn't feel like there's any hope in sight. And the very first day, the sponsoring executive sent me a note saying there was, she was literally all smiles and walking out at 5 o'clock, and just a renewed sense of hope, because as you know, and Gabe knows very well, this is a passion. This is a life calling type of occupation, and for them to have to consider walking away for something they've given so much of their life to, it just feels like a violation, right? And so yeah, it's been really outstanding response.
Yeah, it's tough to go through med school and not have some passion for it. That seems to apply to most doctors. Now, I think many that hear this and say, okay, that's great, but how much work is there after the fact, and how much verification is there after the fact for the doctor? And then, I think we'll come to Gabe as well to hear, what's been your experience with this? But I think that's, seems to be, one of the things I hear a lot is, oh, am I just going to, that was a problem with voice, actually. I'm just going to correct everything that it didn't get right. So why don't I just do it myself? What's how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, no, a good question. So what we're really trying to do is deliver a transformative experience, not an incremental, improvement, because the pain points are, extremely high. We have record levels of burnout. More than 50% of physicians experience it. We have, it's the highest suicide rate of any occupation. So when we think about voice as a solution and is really as a workflow, we want this to be an ostensible, AI assistant that really relieves all the friction and the calorie output to document. And we know with speech recognition tools that exist in the market today that they're fairly accurate. They're in the high 90s, yet we have these record levels of burnout, and we also have there's still inaccuracies in speech, in traditional speech, and physicians have to become an editor. We want to remove that pain point altogether. So from an accuracy standpoint, our goal is 100%. And to ensure that, we have a QA review process where we're looking at the note to ensure that that's the case, so that the workflow is that the provider can either between encounters, midday or end of day, review their notes with confidence that the note is highly meaningful, it reflected what their thought process was, and that it's almost error-free in that regard. So they can just go ahead and sign off, close the note, carve out maybe 10 minutes before they leave, sign off, and go home with a clean slate, knowing that they're done for the day from a clerical standpoint.
Well, let's hear it. I mean, Gabe, you've been using Saykara, so what's been your experience using the Saykara AI assistant, and how did that change your workflow too? I think many would be interested in that as well.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk about that. So maybe before I dive into Saykara, I should give a little bit more background on me, because in some ways I'm not the typical computer using doctor, and I think that it's not fair for me to say that I'm exactly representative, and so I'd like to just be clear about that and talk about the ways that I think I do understand what most of us go through. So because of frustrations with the EMR, I actually built a software company a few years ago about making macros to take steps out of using Epic specifically. And so, I mean, I did a bunch of consulting, building software tools, traveling around trying to help other people with these problems. and felt like I had this obligation to really optimize my own experience, so that I could, speak with truth when I went to sit with someone else and say, hey, here are some things that might be helpful. So what's interesting is when I met the guys from Saykara, I was very much interested in the direction that things were going with AI, but I was a little bit skeptical about how much is this going to help me. I mean, I feel like I was somebody who really optimized my experience, and I prided myself on not taking my work home with me at the end of the day. And that had been a rule I'd had for a long time, and I had a lot of tools that I was using. But I actually had a surprisingly very positive experience, and I'll just maybe go through some of the first things that I noticed. So one is that, so I was using Dragon for my notes up until I switched over, and with Dragon, it is highly accurate. I would consider myself quite good at it. There's some things that require mental effort that I would take for granted. For example, like you have to speak all your punctuation. It doesn't seem like a big deal when you're used to it, but once you let that go and just talk naturally and then try and go back to speaking punctuation, it sucks. You hate it. And so that's one of the things. Physicians' names. I have to tell Kara one time a doctor's name or maybe how to spell it, and I can do that like in the process of having a natural conversation, and it gets it. With Dragon, any doctor who's used it knows that they have a partner who has a name that they can never get Dragon to get it right. And so they always have to be like watching like a hawk. When I say this person's name, is it gonna offend my colleague when I use Dragon? So I mean that's a really real thing. I mean, in fact, when I would get asked for help with Dragon, that was one of the #1 things. I have this person's name I want to say and I can't get it to work right, and we do all these kinds of workarounds and so forth. So that's a problem that doesn't exist. So it's, for me, it's been a much more fluid, natural experience. And I guess when you use Dragon, another thing you do is you read basically everything you do as you go. You're sort of proofreading as you go, which is quite mentally taxing. And I think, again, I got good at it. But once I let that go, I realized that was kind of mentally exhausting. To watch words happen on the screen, and are they right? And sometimes I would make mistakes. I think I've talked to Graham and Ryan about how one thing that's frustrating about mental effort is that other people can't see you using your cognitive energy up. So you can't see how hard I'm working inside of here. Like if I was lifting up dumbbells, you could say, oh, Gabe's working really hard. But our brains actually use a huge amount of calories every day. And I think that if we're jumping through all kinds of cognitive hoops, like you do when you're doing your own dictation with Dragon, we underestimate what kind of effect that has. In fact, I just don't think we really understand that. So I know this is a long-winded answer, but I'm trying to walk through what it's really been like for me. So offloading some of that cognitive burden. I was used to budgeting time at the end of every visit to have my notes done, and I was very fast and very efficient at those, I would say. But with Kara, that doing everything in the room and walking out with a note done was, again, it was like sort of like giving up punctuation. It was like, wow, that's a load off that I didn't realize was a burden, and so it wasn't. Then here's this other job I have to quick try and get done before I move on to the next patient. That was really a big deal.
And do you trust the notes? I mean, like that's, I think, the big fear, kind of what I talked to Ryan about, like, it's like, okay, it's done, but is it done right? Is it done the way I want it?
Much better than mine were with Dragon, I'll tell you. So and anybody who uses it in the beginning is going to, for good reason, want to vet it out and make sure that they feel like they're getting a good response. In fact, that's part of the onboarding, is that you sort of teach the model, how does this need to work for me? But I mean, the review is very, very quick for me at this point, because it's just been so consistent with results. And I mean, that quality assurance piece is spot on. So I have less people coming back to me now saying like, hey, what's this weird thing in your dictation than I did when I would have Dragon. And I was, so like, I think I would see on the screen what I meant to say, but that wasn't always what actually came out. And sometimes those things are quite entertaining. I don't know if it's G-rated enough for this conversation even. You get some weird stuff.
Especially with medical dictionaries, I'm sure.
Yep. Yep.
Well, and I think the other thing that's so fascinating is you talk about Kara like a person, so Kara, I guess, is the name of the voice assistant. So I mean, is that the experience, Graham or Ryan, like that Kara becomes this almost like it was a scribe that you were talking to, like a person scribe, that is there, and oh yeah, I told Kara this, and is that how is that the workflow change that happens?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Ryan, it's funny because we have a pediatrician and different kind of model, but they said the kids come in and then he says, hey, I got this AI assistant things, kind of think of it like a robot and then the kids will often go, hey Kara, hey Kara, how are you?
Yeah.
But actually it is interesting because the docs will say, they treat it very respectfully. Oh, excuse me, Kara, can we place some orders? Thank you very much, Kara. And there's this it's kind of like a politeness that occurs. And then we get the feedback where people will, respond to us and say, hey, Kara has become my best friend, And so it's funny, you never really think about that, but you start to, because you're dependent, start to become dependent and just rely on it. It becomes trusted, and so you kind of, you almost make that crossover to turning it into something that is more human than it perhaps is.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, I say thank you to Alexa, so I bet it's probably says something about me as much as anything.
Right.
Ryan, anything you wanted to add, or?
Well, yeah, like Jarvis almost. It's like an ostensible companion, and I think there is, it's Kara's with you all day long, and you start to there's this comfort factor that plays in that I think physicians come to rely on, and there's just a sense of connectivity, that connection that happens, and an identity that's formed with Kara as an AI assistant. So it becomes more personal over time. It's not immediate certainly, but over time, and it's certainly the impact that it's making. If it's allowing you to increase your productivity, better face time, getting home on time, eliminating after hours, there's a higher degree of connection in that regard, because it is life-changing for many providers.
So what is the workflow for it? I mean, you talk about, it sounds like you can do it on the mobile, or does it have to be a separate device? Do you carry it into the room? Is there one in each room? What's some of the workflow around that? Just to give people an understanding. And along with that, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. How do you inform the patient of what's happening as well to make sure they feel comfortable with the privacy aspects? What's the workflow there? Maybe you could start, Ryan, and then Gabe.
Yep, sure. I'll just kind of give a high level. Maybe Gabe can then share his personal experience. But so first off, we're deployed over an iOS, many iOS devices. The most popular and ubiquitous is the iPhone, because it's meant for speaking, and so very accessible, and we support multiple different platforms within the iPhone. But it's primarily listening, and obviously inside the exam room is the ultimate ambient experience. So you can wake Kara up through a wake word, and by just saying, hey Kara, listen. Okay, Kara, listen. Or you can just tap on Kara. You just select your patient as you walk in the room and press record. So we find that no matter what stage a provider is in their career, whether they're a digital native early on or near retirement, they've all, it works as easy as the dictaphone does, even though this is 180 degrees different than a dictaphone experience. But it's from a just workflow standpoint, very easy. Kara is like a fly in the room, as Graham mentioned. Kara's listening. You just turn it on and then speak naturally. And so it's just the microphone, so we don't require a special smart speaker. We're not outfitting the room with 10 speakers and high-tech equipment in every direction. This is just the provider and their phone wherever they go. So it's accessible in that regard. And I forgot the last part of your question there.
How do you inform patients?
Right, yeah. The consents that in 80% of the states in the U.S., normal written consent as they come in and get checked in and during intake applies. There's 15 states that require dual consent verbally, and so the most of our providers are just inform the patient, I'm using a AI assistant to help me with charting. Is that okay? Or a virtual assistant, and most of them are very familiar with this technology, with Alexa and Siri being very popular. So we in fact, not even on one hand do we have patients declining that, and everything is we're very sensitive around securing personal health information and abiding by the HIPAA regulations, and everything is tightly encrypted. And so that's of foremost importance in our platform. And so we really haven't had any issues, both from the provider standpoint or patients, in terms of collecting audio in that regard.
Yeah, the bigger challenge is probably when the patient, maybe one's just fearful, says no, and then the doctor's like, oh dang, how do I chart again?
Yeah, right.
But I don't know what to do.
They can do it after the fact, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think
you can do it after.
Right. What really lowers their guard, if there are those scenarios, is that they don't see that the clumsy computer sitting in between them, right? And the physician has 100% eye contact, and they feel heard and understood and known. And so if that helps them, they seem to be very receptive to it.
Yeah, I think people are. Gabe, anything you'd add to as far as workflow and things you've seen to make a good experience?
Yeah, so well, I think just to follow on what Ryan said and how patients accept it or not. So my experience has been that number one, patients are very sympathetic to doctors having to use the EHR. Which is something that I don't think I realized quite that much, but people actually were like, oh, I'm really happy for you that you have this tool to make your life easier. So they understand, they're savvy about this problem. So that's really, I mean, they are largely supportive in that way when you say, hey, I have this assistant that's making my charting and interaction with the computer easier. And I would second what Ryan said, that if it allows you to focus more on eye contact and human connection, then that's absolutely something positive. One of the things that happened with me that I did not appreciate was that so I had used a human scribe at one point in my career for a locums job for a couple of months when I was on my way to moving out to Montana. That was just the way their system was set up. And so I'd had a little bit of experience with what that was like, how you have to vocalize things that you're observing. Like, hey, John, your heart sounds normal. And think, it's like the scribe can't figure out what I mean if I don't say something. And I had sort of always had that with me, but had become a little bit less likely to always verbalize as much. And then in preparation for when I was going to start with Kara, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get sort of back into that mindset again. And I just, even before I began the pilot, I started getting better at saying, like, okay, I'm going to describe to the patient what I'm seeing, finding, thinking. And what I noticed is that there was a lot of folks that were very much interested in those things that I had to say, and actually appreciative that I wasn't just sort of put the stethoscope on, make a look of is that a good look, a bad look? What's he thinking? What's he thinking? Right. So I think it increases the communication, sort of holds us accountable to be talking more about what we're seeing. And then the other thing is just in note generation. So there are times when to talk about the plan, for example, you say, okay, for a moment, I just want to speak about what we're going to do. And so you're used to having these conversations, but I tend to be, I think, a little bit more clear and structured in plain English. And patients, they just hang on every word of okay, what I do is I say, okay, I'm gonna tell what I think you said, and then what I think we should do. And if I make any mistakes, please stop me, tell me. And so they just lock on and nod and let me know if there's things I need to change. And so I'm getting more feedback from the patient if maybe I didn't get something quite right in the history or in the plan, that there wasn't understanding. And so I don't think that was an intentional part of what was meant to happen, but it was a very positive thing. So I guess I'd like to throw that out there for folks who aren't using scribes now. of any kind, that if you're doing something that does that for you, that can change your experience. I don't know if did you want me to comment any more on just the general workflow of what it's like to use it, or did these guys answer that?
That'd be great. I mean, if you have other to add, you know, I think it makes sense, you know, and I imagine each one's a little bit different, right? But yeah, it made sense. Is there anything you had specific to add, or do they cover it?
Well, I mean, I can get into the weeds a little bit more on just sort of tactically what it's like for me. So basically, so we're on Epic, which at this point they're working on some more integrations, but it's more like a human scribe type of access that Kara has while we working on a more kind of digital integration. And so basically what you do is you say, okay, this is where my note should go. This is the placeholder for where I want my Saykara note to go. And then as I'm walking into the room, I have my mobile phone and I have my patient list that's been pre-populated, and I select the patient I'm about to go in to see, and I get it ready to put it into listening mode. I walk into the room, say hi, make sure it's okay to get going with that, and then click on listen, and then that activates that ambient listening mode. And then I typically set the phone down, and it can pretty much be anywhere in the room. It doesn't seem like I have problems. I mean, we have sort of standard size exam rooms. There's not a lot of other distracting noise, but it seems like I can pretty much put it anywhere and not miss things. And then I'll just sort of set it down, and the patient and I ignore it until we need it, or until we want to call out things that particularly need to be documented. And then I walk through, like I was just talking about, that process of saying some things that I think specifically need to go into the note and my plan. And then when I'm done, you basically tell it, okay, end the listening for that patient session. And then it goes into the work queue where the AI is already immediately processing it, but then it goes into however the secret sauce happens, where the AI is working on it and the QA is working on it. And then within a little while, I get back a preliminary in the app itself of kind of what things are captured and what they look like. And so I can look at those, and I can, if there's something I want to change, it's as easy as you just can either verbally activate it with a OK Kara command, or you can tap a button and say, hey, I didn't like that, change it to this. And it's very, very natural the way that you can make changes. Although back to where we started, I really at this point hardly have to make changes. I mean, that's not part of my workflow. So yeah, so that, you know, a quick review at some point, make sure there's not any errors, and then because of the way that I have my workflow, basically I go back and sign off on those notes once the output from Saykara is put in where I said it should go, and it's as easy as that. It's very good.
That's great. And you know, I think we need a follow-up conversation about granular data and EHR integration, which, you know, is my bread and butter, as many of you know. But I think that's a future conversation, because it can get into the weeds a lot. But you know, as we wrap up, Ryan, is this mostly for private practices, or are you working with hospitals, health systems too? You know, where does this solution work?
Right. Yeah. You know, we want to make this available to all providers, irrespective of where they're practicing. And so we're serving groups of all sizes, shapes, and forms, from large health systems like Providence, where Gabe is, as well as community health centers, academic centers, single specialty provider groups, and multi-specialty. And so the platform is dynamic in that respect, and we can kind of scale up and down accordingly. And we're very passionate about, you know, eliminating those pain points, serving physicians and mid-levels where they're at. And you know, our platform is agnostic from a EHR standpoint. We integrate with over 12 of them currently through a combination of APIs, FHIR, and some aspects of HL7, and so we're flexible, and we also serve multiple specialties. Currently over 18, as a matter of fact, and one of the most challenging is primary care, where Gabe is practicing today, because the variety of problems that can occur without any advanced preparation. And so we're flexible, and we're serving mid-levels, both physician's assistants as well as nurse practitioners, which are in clinic every day. If they're serving, for example, surgeons, they're doing, in many cases, the lion's share of the medical management. And so it burdens even higher for them, and they've got oversight that creates additional challenges. So we've been kind of open opportunity in that respect right now around the country, and working with many large and mid-sized and small groups alike.
Awesome. And Graham, where is all this headed? What's next? I mean, it sounds like you're working on a bunch of EHR integrations, which makes sense, and hopefully the EHR vendors continue to open up with their APIs. I'm pushing that as much as you, and it sounds like obviously there's learning that happens. The more people, the more it learns, and all that. But is that what's next? Is really those learning, or what's next on your roadmap?
Yeah, that's a great point. We always obviously are focused on continuing to take enhancements from our customers, and that's job number one. So if we've got feedback from our install base and from our users, Gabe and others, that's job number one, because we don't know what really needs to be extended or altered. But beyond that, we have some strategic areas. You talked a little bit around just deeper integrations. Those things are all part of the sort of the day-to-day. There's one piece that we've been working on that I think could be really, really helpful, and we call it pre-charting. But the idea is that before a patient comes for a visit, oftentimes they'll have some reason for that visit, whether it's a sore shoulder or some, cough, or that they've got pain, and some abdominal pain. Whatever it is that knowing that in advance, we have created, which is again driven from the AI. What questions does Gabe ask for shoulder pain or for sinusitis? So we would use that based on the questions that Gabe typically asks, and then push that out to the patient before they arrive through, either a chatbot, whether it's a voice chatbot, or whether it's through SMS, whatever is most convenient. But oftentimes it's going to be SMS, and say, hey, I got some questions for you in advance. Can you help us? Just go through a little bit of branching logic, identifies what is some of the history of your present illness, maybe any past medical history, things like that. And that's then used to kind of really refine the scope of the AI. So the AI, as I said, is, there's a lot of advances in natural language processing and natural language understanding. But one of the great things is the more you know about the patient coming into that visit, the more information you have, the better that AI can function. So pre-charting is something that we've been talking with Gabe about. I think it would be very helpful for a lot of our physicians. It would certainly improve the accuracy of what we're trying to do. I think the other area that we're focused on as well, and Gabe had come up with this, we started to look at it, is can we, based upon the discrete data we're catching, can we help with some medical calculations, whether it's, Framingham risk score, whether it's other types, breast cancer risk assessment scoring based upon near relatives and past history. Those types of things are quite helpful during an encounter, just to be able to say, hey, what's the Framingham's risk score here? And if it does, and then for it to come back, or what's the recommendation on the breast cancer risk score? And then surprisingly enough, the third area is we're getting quite a lot of interest from within procedural areas like a cath lab. So we've got, cath labs are kind of an interesting space. Lots of people talking as part of a team. And the question is, hey, can we take the conversation from that team in a cath lab, and super data intensive as well? What can we do to help them kind of listen to all of the voices in the room with all of the equipment as well, but figure that out so that we can take the clinical team and summarize that in a way that's meaningful, but also satisfies reporting and data log requirements. So yeah, kind of a lot of opportunity, and the AI space continues to evolve daily. So we got to keep up with all of that, and it's just I think it's one of the most exciting places to be for us right now, and it's making an impact. So what else can you ask for?
It's funny you said that. I was just about to say, I think this is the most exciting thing in health IT right now, even though telehealth is being adopted so huge. I think this is much more exciting, right? So, I have a feeling people listening to this are going to say, I got to try it, or I don't believe it, I want to try it, whatever the frame is. Where can people go to learn more about Saykara?
Yeah, best place is just to head over to the website www.saykara.com, saykara.com. All the contact details are there. Obviously, can follow up with any one of us, and all of our details are available. So, yeah, best to head over to the website. And if you got any questions, just let us know. Awesome. Ryan, anything else you'd add?
Yeah, there's a number of resources on there, including a webinar that was that Gabe did, and we've got some other testimonials and interviews, firsthand accounts from physicians and mid-levels on what their experience was like before and after Cara, and those are all available free download. And so you can find those on our website, or if you just want to inquire and like to set up and learn more in a one-on-one meeting, you can just email us info@saykara.com.
Awesome. Well, it kind of feels like a dating thing. They're dating the AI assistant Cara. They can swipe right or.
Actually, I do. Okay, so I want to add one last thing before we sign off, which is that so for people that are skeptical and like wondering why is this going to be different from things that I've used before, the EHR has been a major pain point, and one of the reasons that I've come to believe is that no one is accountable to my needs. So I can say what I need, and then it goes to my local informatics committee, and then it goes maybe further on up the chain until finally, if it's a big enough problem, it might get to Epic, and then maybe it will get onto their dashboard, and then maybe 6 months or a year from now, they might change something. Well, at the same time, they're changing something else that's going to make me mad. So it's, it might be a wash at best. But sorry guys, but that's the reality. But yep. So Saykara is essentially my employee. They are really motivated to help me, and if I don't like something, I say, hey guys, this isn't working, and they say, okay, we are so focused on your experience, they actually care about my experience, and they make it work. And so having an employee that you can fire that's trying to help you gives you a lot more say in what your experience is going to be like, versus like my push against the EHR is like, I push really hard and nothing happens.
Wow, that's a great way to frame it. So thanks for sharing, and thanks to all of you for sharing this. It really is exciting technology, and I think is the future of documentation in healthcare. Many people have talked about all sorts of things, and they think they can just get rid of the EHR, and I'm like, no, the compliance is there for a reason, the reimbursement system is there for a reason, and so we have to have solutions like we've talked about today to be able to satisfy those needs while still removing the documentation burden from the doctor. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for watching. If you want to find more great health IT content like this, check it out at healthcareittoday.com. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.